Hey, welcome to the Elevate Your Energy podcast. This is your host, Evelyne Lambrecht. And as always, I am very excited for this guest. Ever since I first found her work, I knew I wanted to interview her at some point. So, Jolene Park, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Evelyn. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, so we definitely have a few things in common in our alcohol-free journey. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about gray area drinking. Jolene is a gray area drinking coach. She is writing a book. And so I want to talk about all the things. Jolene, I did your training last year, which actually feels longer ago somehow. So I'm just very excited to dive into all things drinking, not drinking, yada, yada. So thank you again for being here. Let's start with talking about what is your definition of a gray area drinker? What does that mean?
Well, so the way I define it, and there's certainly history and research here. So, it's not just me kind of pulling the definition out of the ethers, but my definition is it's the space between every now and again drinking and end stage drinking that requires some medical intervention, because somebody might have a seizure, or when they stop drinking, or they're in stopping drinking at certain levels can be very, very serious, and can be a medical emergency. So that's not gray area drinking. And then the every now and again drinking, like a couple drinks over a course of a year, which there's lots of people that do that. That's also not gray area drinking. So it's the space between those two extremes of really not drinking and drinking to an end stage that requires medical intervention. And then the truth is that most people, the way most people drink is in between those two extremes. And so there's a long spectrum, which then is this blanket kind of umbrella term of gray area drinking, and there is research on it. It wasn't a hashtag that I created on social media. There's actual data on it that goes back to both you and I's background with nutrition, and that's where that original research started.
And last time when I talked about drinking on this podcast, which was an interview that Annie Grace and I did with each other, and she's, the reason that I was able to stop drinking now almost 3 years ago, 1,000 days last week.
Awesome.
It's fun to celebrate those big milestones. How long is it now for you? 7 years or
it'll be 8 years in December. So in 2 months from this
cool.
recording, it'll be 8 years.
That's awesome. And I remember talking with Annie about, the definition of like an alcoholic. A lot of people still think that, alcoholism is this, drinking under the bridge, like out of a brown paper bag thing. And that's the image that we have. And, sometimes people ask me like, well, what happened? And I think this is one thing that, made me resonate with you is you always say like, you didn't have a rock bottom and you don't need a rock bottom to stop drinking. So I'd love for you to talk more about your story around that, how you stopped drinking, and talk about that perception of that rock bottom in general.
Right. So, my friends and family wouldn't have said to you 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that I had a problem with alcohol. And even, my friend group and kind of my social group, I was actually not one of there were people who drank a lot more than me. And gray area drinkers will often say that, that their spouses or partners, they're just like, you're worrying too much. Like you don't drink that much. You don't drink. It's not like you have a problem or anything. And that was certainly how my drinking literally played out. In the world. I didn't drink large volumes of alcohol. However, it was very easy to pour a glass of wine and then be like, I'll have another glass, and then I'll have another glass. And it was very easy to drink most of the bottle pretty frequently. And that was a pretty frequent pattern. And some people will hear that. Sometimes I'm a little cautious about actually saying amounts, because the thing with that is some people will hear that and say like, oh, I'm just getting started with a couple drinks, or, close to a bottle. And other people like, oh my gosh, like you could drink a bottle, like that's a problem. And so, the truth is, the reality of this is that there is no safe or recommended recommended healthy intake level of alcohol, which I always fall back on. And so it doesn't take much. It doesn't really take any at all to be on the spectrum. Like once we're having a couple of drinks, and it is, for a woman who has 7 or more drinks in a week, and a drink is defined as 5 ounces of I was a wine drinker, so 5 ounces of wine in one sitting, not like Olivia Pope, big fishbowl size glasses. It really doesn't take much. Like if you're having 2 drinks, nightly or on a regular occasion, that is well into that heavy, risky drinking category. So that was me. I didn't drink every day. I stopped a lot. I mean, I didn't need to drink. I would go periods without drinking, and then it would be easy to binge drink. And so it was that, and nothing, like so many of my clients say, nothing bad ever happened, meaning like there wasn't, a traffic accident or a DUI or any kind of altercation with relationships or a work scenario because I had had alcohol. I was in my work situations, even in corporate wellness, there's happy hours and out with kind of even my wellness industry, we'd have glasses of wine together. And so I was drinking the way my colleagues were drinking, my personal friends were drinking, and I didn't stand out as, somebody who was drinking too much or people would point a finger and say, oh, Jolene is a problem drinker. But the way I was drinking, easily being able to have another glass. And it's like, it was too much for me because of how I felt. I would, I'd have such a, my blood sugar would drop so quickly, the next day. And it's that low blood sugar, that queasy kind of hangover feeling. And so physically I didn't feel well, but I liked the initial effect of red wine when I had it. And so it was just that back and forth, which so many people tend to do. And, it's like, oh, I'm not going to drink this much. And then I would have more than I'd want to. And then I'd stop for periods of time. And it just got to a point 8 years ago, nothing happened. There was no, again, no major rock bottom like we would see in the movies, type event. It was just a very quiet internal decision that I just don't want to keep doing this Groundhog Day of I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to limit my drinking. I can be a social drinker. And I just wanted out of that loop. And I made the decision to just stop for good.
I love that. I think it's just amazing. And I think it's so inspiring because it's true. That is what we see in the movies. And it's funny that you mentioned Olivia Pope because I feel like, having stopped drinking and then seeing the amount of drinking that happens on these shows, it's just crazy. And I don't even know if she's an extreme, but yeah, it's funny how our society just, it's just such an ingrained part of our society for everything, like the happy hours and the mommy wine culture and all of that.
Yeah, I think Sex and the City contributed to some of that, of just that sophisticated girlfriends going out, having these fun drinks, these cosmos, and I think that started to portray. It was one of the shows, one of the media sources that portrayed drinking among women in a very different way that it. We didn't see that like in the 1980s when I grew up on TV shows. And so yes, there is the media that has glamorized it. And it's like, oh, this is the sophisticated way as a 30-something, 40-something, 50-something woman out working, achieving, doing what we're doing, and then coming together with friends. And it's just part of it, having fun drinks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on the sophistication part. And I think my story that I was wanting to transition into the wine industry or considering it. And then I found out about Annie Grace's book, This Naked Mind, and I read it while I was taking a class on the business of wine. And then that was kind of strange, because I thought, okay, when this class ends, maybe I'll try this 30-day experiment. So that was interesting, but I'm glad I didn't get into that because like you and I have always been interested in health and fitness and nutrition. And that's just like our life basically. But it's so interesting. And it's true what you say about the wellness industry. There's a lot of drinking at wellness conferences. And, even if it's organic wine, it doesn't matter, it's still alcohol. So, and I definitely used to be that person who drank like more than was necessary at those conferences. So, and I, like you, I loved that feeling of wine and what it did for me, kind of like that instant relaxation. And it's rare for me these days to even feel like I wish I'd had that, to relax. And it comes up very occasionally, but it also passes very quickly. But I want you to talk more on a like biochemical level in terms of, neurotransmitters, like what's happening in our brains, in our bodies when we, feel some sort of way and like turn to wine to help us relax.
Well, what's happening is, we need to first go in and get the baseline of what is happening. So where are people's neurotransmitters? We all have these neurochemicals: dopamine, serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine, are some of the major neurotransmitters. And you and I sitting here right now have levels. But the question is, what level is our GABA? What level is our serotonin? And depending on our sleep patterns recently, our own immune system recently, if we've been sick, if we've been under a lot of mental, emotional stress, even depending on epigenetics, so how we came in to form, we can just be set up with certain predisposition to having less amounts of neurotransmitters. And things like, poor diet, lots of sugar, artificial sweeteners, chemicals in, toxic environments, all of that can push on the neurotransmitters and deplete them quicker than the body, needs to deplete them. And so then what happens is the neurotransmitters are responsible for our mood and our appetite and libido, and just basically, I mean, the big thing is emotions and, how we feel, and even metabolism and all those pieces. And so when neurotransmitters get disrupted, the body is always trying to come back into homeostasis. And so there's a temporary false positive feeling when we drink alcohol or smoke pot or use a chemical outside of us. And so there's this temporary internal chemical feeling of like, oh, this is a feeling of optimal GABA. It's not. It's a false sense of optimal GABA. And so when we drink, it's this vicious cycle. So we could come into approaching, the happy hour and with low neurotransmitters. And then we have a drink at happy hour and there's that initial like, oh, it feels good. Our muscles relax, our mind kind of slows down, and that's that feeling of optimal neurotransmitters. But then very quickly, that alcohol depletes neurotransmitters even more. And then we want more alcohol because it doesn't feel good not to feel good. So it's this vicious cycle of trying to boost neurotransmitters, which no shame, no blame. The body is just physiologically trying to keep things in balance. And alcohol is a very, easy thing that we can reach to. It's like what we just talked about. It's what we have been modeled. We see so many others do. It's just kind of the cultural piece. And we all have evidence and experience of a drink, how it feels physically, and it feels good initially. And so if we don't have other modeling or training of how to do some of that internal regulation so we feel good without alcohol, it just starts to become this vicious cycle of attempting to boost neurotransmitters, but ultimately depleting them even further and getting caught quickly in an alcohol cycle.
Do you think that there are people who just like drink for fun and they're not trying to fulfill that thing, but still maybe, drink kind of a lot? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
I do. There are certainly every now and again drinkers out there, no doubt. There are many, many people who truly just drink every now and again. I think once it gets into a drunk state, so when we tip over into intoxication, the slope gets slippery.
Mm-hmm.
to answer your question. And ultimately it's, it's the person who is they're themselves in that experience. It's them just answering that, not me answering the question, but them just very honestly answering, the question. And it's a slippery slope once you're drunk and intoxicated, definitely blacking out. So, the definition of just kind of drinking for fun, it's I want to dig deeper of really hearing there's 5 different people could tell you they're drinking for fun, and you get 5 completely different stories. But I think once you're in that intoxicated state, it gets sticky quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to get back to what you said about, learning to, well, I can't remember how you put it just now. We always talk about regulating our nervous system without doing that with alcohol. So, and this is really what you teach in all your coaching. I believe this is what your book is going to be about. This is what your TED Talk is about. So, and your program was awesome, the Gray Area Drinking Coaching Program. So I would love for you to talk more about your Nourish method and what you've noticed in working with so many gray area drinking clients over the last few years, and how what are some of the ways that you teach to regulate our nervous system without reaching for that drink?
It's the missing piece. So there's 2 missing pieces here. The first missing piece is this gray area, which we've turned a blind eye to. And then the second missing piece is after we stop drinking, now what? And so both of those kind of traditionally, historically, we've skipped over. And so this piece about then if we stop drinking, a lot of people stop drinking, but they'll talk about like white knuckling, or they're thinking about drinking a lot, or they're really efforting for quite some time, for weeks or months, to not drink. And there can be that struggle, even though they're not drinking, of, well, how do I socialize and how do I have fun? And like you just mentioned about, drinking for fun, or how do I relax when kind of that only resource has been alcohol. So now it's resourcing our nervous system with other things that aren't alcohol. So where I start is biochemically, with the body, and then emotionally with the stress response. And that can be some of, if the trauma that gets locked in a fight, flight, collapse state. And then spiritually. So we are a body, we're a mind, we're a spirit. And traditionally how we've looked at recovery or when people stop drinking is just all cognitive process of kind of working with the ego and working with the willpower from a cognitive mental perspective of it's self-will run riot, or character defects, and the neuroscience it's just we've evolved. And today the neuroscience talks about body bottom up, not top down. And what that means is bottom being the body. We have to work with the body because that's where the nervous system is. It's the first effect that is felt when we drink alcohol. It's in the body. The muscles relax. The mind starts to, the brain waves will start to slow down, which then lets the thoughts slow down. It's all a physiological response first. And so on the back end of it, when we stop drinking, we need to then work with that physiological response. So my Nourish method is looking at the comprehensive approach. And so Nourish stands for notice nature, observe your breath, unite with others, replenish with food, initiate movement, sit in stillness, and harness creativity. And so it hits the comprehensive approach of, yes, food and nutrition are a piece of it. That's that physical body biochemistry, but it's also emotions, with community, with sitting in stillness, letting the mind and the body settle into a relaxation response, using the breath for that, having some spiritual connection also in stillness, that fun, the leisure through creativity, being in nature. So it's all of these vital nutrients. It's not just what we eat and how we move, which are important for any wellness and particularly recalibrating after drinking, but it's a comprehensive piece beyond just what we're eating and how we're moving. And then from there, I break it down, as you know, And there's many, many resources around neurotransmitters, around polyvagal theory, around working with the gut microbiome, working with the attachment piece with relationships and adversity. And if the nervous system is, if the switch gets flipped, like if we always want to flee when there's stress or we collapse and freeze, that's polyvagal. And so it's using the modern neuroscience and applying it directly to recalibrating, replenishing, and rewiring our neuroplasticity so that we have this bigger zone of resilience, window of tolerance, that it's not just we're hanging from that one thread and alcohol's kind of the only option, the only resource. There's many, many resources, but it's, my work is about the education, and then giving people the experience of those other resources.
Yeah, it's interesting that in traditional recovery, and I've never been in it, so I'm not speaking from firsthand experience, just from reading about it, but that it does focus so much on using willpower to stop and like doing it one day at a time. Like, I'm not drinking today, and I don't want to live that way. Like, I'm sure for both of us, alcohol is, well, obviously we talk about it, but it's not something that we think about. It's not like we have to convince ourselves that we shouldn't have a drink or use discipline to do that, which is so freeing. And I just, love that feeling. It feels very powerful. And I know in some recovery programs, they do use some of these things, like they do use the neurotransmitter component. So all of that to say that I hope that we do evolve to incorporate some more of these practices, because so many people are suffering, and it's not just alcohol, but I know that the pandemic definitely made that worse. So I think it's more important than ever to have voices like yours to talk about this. And I'm also grateful to like Dr. Andrew Huberman, who just did a podcast on alcohol. Though, he really only talked about like the brain and body part, but it's helpful too. I think that I read a lot of the comments on the YouTube video, and I feel like, some people, that's what they need to stop drinking, like just knowing how bad it is for our brains. So, and I'm sure you've seen some changes too, just in the last few years since you stopped drinking, in how this alcohol-free movement has evolved.
Absolutely. It was pretty taboo when I stopped drinking in 2014. There were not the Instagram accounts, there weren't all the online courses and 30-day, sober October and that type of stuff that was really front and center like it is now. So it's great that it's evolved and there's such a movement behind it, and it's just going to continue. It really is, this is the next wellness movement, that's sober for the health of it, and the sober curiosity and kind of rethinking drinking. So it's all very, very positive that it's just becoming more publicly accepted, but it's taken time. It's certainly, that there was a much older kind of traditional approach. And then about 10 years ago, this conversation of alcohol free for the health of it, kind of sober by choice, or however people want to define that, is really, there's a lot of momentum behind it right now.
Since I'm a huge fan of food and supplements, I do love to talk about that a little bit more. Can you share some of the things that you recommend when someone is first stopping drinking, even say like the first 30 days? What are some of the supplements that could be supportive during that time period, as neurotransmitters are trying to get re-regulated without alcohol?
Sure. Well, whole food is the first place, because any supplements are the extraction of those micronutrients that are in the macronutrients from food. So the first and foremost place, if people can go to whole food, that's ideal and sometimes easier, cost effective perhaps. So I encourage people to, at this stage, first giving up alcohol. Taking alcohol out is big. So the way that I work with people moving forward is, what can we add in? What are all the different pieces to add in? And that includes food. And lots of times food can get sticky quickly with people. of their, sometimes people can have disordered eating histories or some obsession, with food, or like the right diet, or all that. So I always want to be really sensitive to that. And with that, of talking about all the benefits of, different things that we can add in. So we really can't go wrong with whole food, real food, adding that in. Most people tend to eat like the same 8 things over and over most of the time. So just expanding what we're eating. And then like the most kind of concrete, practical, like to do addition when you stop drinking is actually, ironically, to eat more regularly. And I say ironically because I think we're so good about kind of the restriction, have to stop, can't do something, which we're already doing with alcohol. But with food, it's actually now the opposite. So we want to add in on a really regular basis, and primarily start with protein, whatever protein source people like. If they like and eat animal protein, any and all animal protein, every 2 or 3 hours initially. And I'm not talking like a big 16-ounce steak, like just about the size of your palm, just a small serving. You could even split like a serving in half if you're doing like every 2 hours. So eat half a chicken breast, now, and then 2 or 3 hours later, eat the other half of it. And just kind of, stair step your way like that through the day. And over about 72 hours, like after about 3 days of really regularly eating protein, don't take my word for it, anyone listening, but try it for yourself, because pretty much it's not, there's never just an end all kind of be all fix, magic bullet. However, whatever people are dealing with, cravings of any kind for sugar, alcohol, emotional irritability, insomnia, anxiety, fear, worry, whatever kind of the struggle is around sleep or appetite, or just impulse control, getting protein in on a regular basis. Don't take my word for it. It needs to be experiential. But I have seen in myself and with my clients some really huge shifts. Like it can move the needle for a lot of people, almost 80%. And it's the thing of like, it takes effort, because we have to effort to eat every 2 or 3 hours, but it can make a huge, huge difference. And the reason with the protein is protein breaks down into amino acids, and amino acids are the raw materials that really build and nourish those neurotransmitters. And we can take amino acids in supplement form, but just eating actual protein is the best, most foundational place to start.
Awesome. And what about supplements? Because I know I just have to. I've worked in supplements for 10 years now. So what are some, and actually I feel like I didn't initially do this, to be honest with you, even though I have access to all the supplements. But this is not the way that I stopped drinking. And I bet if I had focused more on this, it would have been easier. Or even as I was thinking about stopping drinking, kind of like, supporting my neurotransmitters better, so that it would have been easier to stop, because it took me like three experiments to really make it stick. I did like 80 days the first time, and then 30 days a couple months later, went back to just drinking the way just I had been before, even with all that knowledge. And then it was finally January 1st, 2020. Since then, I just haven't gone back, and I don't intend to.
Did you think about supplements, or
did you? I do take stuff anyway, but I wasn't specifically thinking, oh, I really need to support my GABA or this or this, because I think all the supplements that you recommended when I was taking your program, I had, but I wasn't necessarily strategically supporting myself in that way,
Well, and with your work, had you studied any about the neurotransmitters?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. For more than 10 years. Yes.
Yeah.
It's that knowing versus doing thing,
I know. I'm the same way. I mean, I went to my chiropractor yesterday, and he's reminding me, he's like, go home and do some apple cider vinegar, honey, and salt. And I'm like, oh, great idea. Like, not that I don't know that. And I did it, and I'm like, that made such a difference. So we're all like that. It's like the reminder of all the stuff we know.
Right.
But, So yeah, I started studying about neurotransmitters in 2006. I quit drinking in 2014. So I was like you, like I'd studied it, I knew about it. Um, However, when I stopped, and I knew that my GABA was low because I had done some testing. I had done a urine test. I had done the neurotransmitter quiz, and
Mm-hmm.
they both came up with low GABA, which I find a lot of gray area drinkers. That's very common. And without even taking tests, gray area drinkers will say, I'm more of an anxious person. I, drink because of anxiety, or I quit drinking and I'm realizing that I'm more anxious than I thought I was. So it's, again, there's exceptions to everything, but most gray area drinkers will identify as anxious. And that was certainly me, not where I was like having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, but I'm like a ruminator. I'm a worrier, and over and over. And that's a form of generalized anxiety. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I would use alcohol for, red wine, to then just shut that off at night, and it worked. So when I temporarily, so
Yeah.
when I quit drinking, I knew, again, about the neurotransmitter piece. And so I kind of dug in, and I started, saying, all right, like what would be, the best little cocktail, pardon the pun, to support my GABA. And so what I just kind of came up with for myself and did for quite some time, for months, and I will go back to it when I feel like, oh, my brain's kind of amping up with that ruminating. So what I did was an inositol, which I just absolutely love and find pretty immediate benefit from it. And I'm impressed with the data on it, that
Mm-hmm.
inositol is been used for anxiety and panic and phobia and OCD and kind of all the things. So instead of using alcohol, I took inositol. Like I always, as you know, in the training, I say take it as directed on the label, unless you're working with a practitioner who's working with you therapeutically. So inositol was top of my list. I noticed a really big difference with it. And then I did 3 herbs in tincture form. And those were passion flower, lemon balm, and holy basil. And sometimes I would drink Tulsi tea, which is also holy basil. And you can drink lemon balm tea. But basically, I like doing the tinctures as directed. And then I would open up some L-theanine, an L-theanine capsule, and put that right under my tongue. And that was kind of my little concoction, maybe some magnesium, some minerals, in there on top of that. But I really just regularly did that, especially for the first 30 days. And it really, I feel like, kind of calmed and really helped my brain. Another piece that I did with the neurotransmitter piece was the alpha stim. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, if you remember me talking about that in the training. So it's FDA approved. I got it at a functional medicine conference in 2006 when I learned about neurotransmitters. And you just there's 2 clips to hook on each earlobe, and it's battery operated, a 9-volt battery. And you just turn it on, and I can control kind of how high it goes. Like, I push up it's not volume, but push up, and I feel the zap more strongly, or I can decrease the strength. And so that just helps balance brain waves, the alpha brain state. So I would do the alpha stim. And again, anyone listening, you can go to the alpha stim website. There's all kinds of papers and research on it. It is FDA approved for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. And so I had that alpha stim little machine, and that was just what I pieced together. And I'm like, I'm not going to use alcohol to get that seemingly GABA boost. I'm going to do what I know really consistently and intentionally to get my GABA stabilized, so that sharp edge of wanting alcohol starts to become diluted. And it worked. And so that's where I started. And, and also with blood sugar, like I really was intentional about trying to eat regularly, not as much being really restrictive with sugar. I mean, I would take it or leave it, but I was intentional about trying to get protein in, and then doing those supplements, doing the alpha stim. And that was, that kind of got my baseline in initially. And then I started doing more somatic stuff 6 months in, and learned a lot more of that, and found that really beneficial to work on some of that emotional stress response of the fight and the flee and the collapse. Because when I get stressed and feel pressure, I just want to flee. And a way for me to flee is, to drink, to just kind of escape and drink. And so how then to work, if I, it can't always, it's the big picture. It's not just nutrients. So then I worked with the somatic, polyvagal, the emotional side, the bigger picture of relaxation and community and all of those pieces.
I want to talk more about that for sure. I can hear you have a visitor who's also trying to be on the podcast. I don't know if it's a crow or.
Yeah, do you want me to close my window?
No, it's fine. It's just funny. I get some crows here who are super loud, that are super loud sometimes. So
I never know like what you can hear. It's loud if you can hear it through the Zoom.
I can.
Sometimes it's like I hear it and then they're like, no, I don't hear it on the video. But sorry about that.
No. I just think it's funny. I love birds. It's all good. Yeah, I feel like, I probably was taking a lot of those supplements just at the same time because I'm always trying different things for mental health. And, I am a clinical herbalist. And so I've tried so many of the different herbs that are great for anxiety. And passion flower is actually my favorite herb because it's just such a beautiful flower. But passion flower is especially helpful for those who are like in caring professions, like healthcare professionals, teachers, those who take care of others. So some people might resonate with passion flower on that level as well. And there's so many other herbs like motherwort, like for mothering types and for transitions in life, like menopause and, becoming a new mom. So there's so many beautiful plants that we can use, for that. And I also just wanted to mention, and you probably had this experience too, is I was quite anxious and depressed probably most of my life. And it's not like I never experienced that anymore. I do sometimes, but I feel like it's just not, it doesn't pull me down quite like it used to, or for as long as it used to. And I felt like alcohol helped me not be as anxious, just like you were saying, but I noticed like overall the anxiety is just dramatically less. And I think sometimes I forget what it was like until, sometimes I have conversations on Instagram with people or read people's experiences about that 4 a.m. wake up. I didn't even realize how common that was, that heart racing, head sometimes pounding, existential dread, thinking like I'm never drinking again. But then at 5 p.m., you're like, later that day, just I need a drink to like feel normal again. And I definitely don't miss that part of drinking. I don't wake up in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I don't wake up like super excited, but I don't miss at all what I used to wake up like at 4 or 5 a.m.
Yeah, I had a potential client who came on as a client years ago, and she asked me. She said, "How do you stick with it?" And I said, "I don't want to go back to the place that you're at right now," which was pretty bold and blunt to say.
Yeah.
But she hired me, and she said that made her stop in her tracks, and she quit drinking. That. But it's true. Like, I don't want to go back to that place. It's just miserable. And not to say that not drinking, there aren't miserable days or times or periods.
Yeah.
Life is life, and life can be hard. But with alcohol, and especially with that, because that's all blood sugar stuff, that whole 4 a.m. and all of it, mentally and physically, it's that low blood sugar. And then even at 5 o'clock, it's still low blood sugar. Like, okay, I'm good, I'm going to drink. It's such a blood sugar cycle. And I'm so happy to be out of it. And I agree with you. You kind of forget sometimes how bad that was, and what it's like, because it's been 8 years since I've been in that alcohol blood sugar spin.
Totally. And that's something that helps me if I ever do feel like, gosh, it just would be nice to have a glass of wine right now. And like I said, it is so fleeting, but then I'm like, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm not going to have just one. I'll be right back there. Don't want to do it. So, and I even, when I did my last podcast with Annie Grace, I talked about, well, one thing that's also freeing thought is I'm not saying I'll never drink again, because I hate being restrictive. I can't do that with other things. Yet at the same time, I just, you know what I mean? I don't want to, but I don't feel restricted saying like, or what Annie says, like, I can have a drink at any time if I want, but I choose not to. And I find a lot of freedom in saying that. And where was I going with that thought? Oh, so when I was talking to Annie, even then, and this was January of 2021, I said, you know, I haven't done a Europe trip not drinking. Like, I just can't imagine going to Europe, where I'm from, and just not having that, like all the restaurants and time with family. But I just did it. I went in September, and you know what? It was easy. It was wonderful. It was great. Like, I really don't feel like I missed out on anything. I was surprised to see, and maybe either I didn't notice it before or things have just changed over the last few years because I hadn't gone in 4 years. But there was at least one alcohol-free beer option at each place. Now, I don't love the taste of beer anyway, but I did try some. There were alcohol-free like cocktails. There were some alcohol-free wines, like at the grocery store, a whole section of beer and wine that was alcohol-free. And that was just really positively surprising to me, you know, and I think we are moving in that direction here in the US too. But all of that to say, I had a great trip. I did not miss out at all, you know, because I just know I would have wasted time drinking, you know, if I was still doing that. So, have you had experiences like that, like on vacation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, travel, I love to travel. And so travel to me is very invigorating. And that's what I was thinking too when you were saying that, of like, sometimes, you know, there's that thought of like, oh, it'd be nice to have a glass of wine, kind of, you know, how you started that. And I get that. And that's something that, it's not like we give up wine and then we can't kind of have that experience or that feeling. And so for me, just travel, especially international travel, is so invigorating and kind of like, I just feel alive in a way that I think some people might chase alcohol to feel invigorated or alive. And I mean, just travel in and of itself does that for me.
Yeah.
But all of these pieces that, you know, that has been the intention behind. It was first for me. And, you know, now for the work I do, I say to clients that it's not just because if you don't drink, you just have to now jump off a cliff and essentially be miserable. You know, it's like alcohol or nothing. And that's where my work comes in, is that, you know, taking the concoction for me of some passion flower and lemon balm and inositol, I can feel a calm that's not drug induced, that's not, you know, with any, that has kind of that same feeling. The alpha stem does it for me. I started knitting like 3 years into not drinking. That it put me in that real kind of single focus, like, okay, it's like my mind slows down, and, you know, that deep breath, sitting at the ocean does that. So for me, all of these, and the resources are different for different people, but the nourish resources of nature, breath, food, movement, you know, it could be Tai Chi or kind of a slow energy practice, or we can start to feel that same state, that same physiological state that we felt, you know, drinking. And so for me, travel is just that good feeling state where, yeah, it's like, oh, that's how that kind of euphoric feeling of drinking. And it's just like, just let me go international, and that's all I need.
Yeah.
Get on a flight somewhere. So.
I'm with you on that one. And I think sometimes I used to think like, oh, alcohol would enhance this experience. And maybe it did for, you know, a couple minutes, but then it doesn't after, you know, like you don't need the alcohol to enhance a beautiful sunset, or that you can already appreciate, you know, without that. So,
Right.
I want to go back to the somatic piece, because this is something that I really learned more about from you, and, you know, really started listening to a lot when I took your program. So talk a little bit more about what does that even mean, somatic work, and how can someone, you know, find out more about it or do it, practice it? Do you need to go to a practitioner to do that? Can you do it on your own?
Well, soma means body, and it's there's a field of therapists out there called somatic experiencing therapists. So experiencing the body in the way of where's the tension, where's the are your hands cold? Is your neck tense? Is your stomach, is there that nausea sitting in your stomach? Or so it's that embodied, like what's happening right now in my body, which is not easy. Some people can be like, I have no idea what's happening in my body, and so that's the practice, and it's actually very practical. It's not an esoteric theoretical thing, and one of the first ways of working somatically is working with the senses. So what do you visually see right now in your space and place? What do you smell, if anything, right now? What do you hear other than my voice? Is there a lingering taste? And what's touching your skin, like the texture of the clothes, the shirt you have on, like what's that texture, touch feel like? And that helps bring the mind back from the past, if it's back there thinking about something, or if it's jumped ahead to the future, bringing the attention to the senses. Like, what do I see right here on my desk? An object, a color, what do I hear or smell? And so then we can enhance that practice of the five senses practice. So, sitting for some people using like a hot water bottle, touch on their belly, listening to some specific calming music. But it can also be movement, going out. For me, I'm at the beach now, like walking barefoot on the beach. So my feet touching the sand. I can smell the salt water. I can hear the waves. I can see the waves. So there's all different ways. Knitting can be a five senses practice. And so working with people then of what are those senses, like of using your optic nerve, of holding kind of a soft gaze or letting that peripheral vision expand. What are smells, like aromatherapy that people might like, or sounds, and then really consciously bringing that in, and that can start to settle the nervous system, because that's the limbic brain. The emotional brain understands sensation, understands senses. It does not understand language. So when we're stressed, when we're activated and we're trying to regulate and not be so activated with alcohol, telling someone to calm down, or just that doesn't work, because the part of the brain that's now in the driver's seat is the limbic brain that understands sensation. So we have to work with the sensation of the body first, through the senses. A secondary way, or another primary way in somatics, is the ground. So literally putting our feet on the earth, on the ground, laying down on the ground, sitting on the ground. So touching grass or sand or dirt, but even in the house, just, noticing the floor that's underneath you right now. It might be carpet, it might be tile, but noticing that surface as it touches your feet. So it's this grounding, working with the senses, helping the body orient here to present time. And none of it's theoretical. It's a practical practice. And it's like lifting weights, like building the bicep muscle. It's that we're building this muscle to start to work with the embodied somatic practice, but it settles and regulates the nervous system. And there's different exercises and different resources to learn in that body of work.
Beautiful. Thank you. And as you're talking about it, I'm just reminded that I need to go back to my notes and practice some of this stuff, I definitely do the walks, but all the other stuff I sometimes forget about,
Well, yeah, just like we were saying a minute ago. I had my chiropractor the other day remind me of because and that's actually a good part of this too, is that it's not about the intellect. Like, it's not about getting more information. It's about the practice of it, of what just happened in your body. Because when we drink alcohol, it's a physical experience. We take the physical substance of alcohol, put it in our physical body, and we get an immediate physical effect. So now with the somatic work and this regulation work, it's physical. So it's doing, a physical practice And then pretty immediately, do you notice a physical effect or not? And if you don't notice it or don't like the effect, stop doing it. So a lot of clients will be like, oh, I do yoga and I meditate and I journal. And I'm like, so what happened? Do you like it? And they're like, what do you mean? Because it's not about checking boxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, do you get an effect? And that's where the coaching comes in, because that takes some experimentation, and also having the coach resource you with resources. Because lots of people don't know some of these grounding resources or some of these polyvagal resets, and they're actual practical resources. They're not just theory.
Yeah. Since you mentioned your program, and I know that I do have quite a few healthcare professionals who listen to this podcast, can you just briefly talk about your program and then also tell us about your book?
Yeah, so the program is for coaches and practitioners who are either licensed or certified, have a foundational training in working with clients. And it's a 7-week program of this, nourish method to work with gray area drinkers. So I have worked full time with gray area drinking clients for the last 6 years. And so I'm not teaching from theory. I'm teaching from in the trenches, boots to the ground experience of working with clients. And so first, assessing gray area drinking clients, finding that ideal client. This is not addiction therapy. It's not, recovery coaching. Gray area is its own unique piece, but I'm very big on, we stay in our lane, we stay in our scope. And if we need to refer, gray area drinkers can stop drinking, and they do stop drinking. So when they come into the coaching, they're there to learn how to recalibrate, repair now that they've stopped drinking. So then I just train on the neurotransmitters, the somatic work, the polyvagal, the behavior physiology, working with the amygdala, the limbic brain as the coach, and putting together a real resourced coaching offering of keeping clients accountable for them to learn how to repeat these practices and groove new neural pathways, so that both you as the coach and your clients are very successful on both sides. And then my book is just the extension of my TED Talk, which has needed to be put into written form, and I haven't had time. So I'm working on that, just the whole piece about these missing biochemical pieces, some that we didn't have time to go into, the sensitivity gene, the trauma, the adversity, the hormone piece, for women, and then putting together, that nourish method of just practical pieces that people can actually do to recalibrate instead of trying to always use their willpower.
And when is your book tentatively coming out?
I don't have a date.
Okay.
So I don't have a date. It's coming.
Okay, cool. Well, I can't wait for it. And whether you're a healthcare professional or coach listening to this or not, Jolene has amazing information on her Instagram all the time. You should check out the TED Talk, and on Instagram, it's Jolene_Park. And then I have one more question for you. So now that you haven't had a drink for almost 8 years, do you feel different, or like what has changed from you from, say, the first 3 years of not drinking? Anything?
Oh, that's a good question. The first year is the hardest. And so I think, coming out of the first year, but yeah, even after 3 years, I really don't think about drinking ever. I mean, that's one thing that's changed. But I mean, everything's changed. My whole career has changed because of this decision. I've completely moved across the country. It's like, I think my whole life trajectory, if I were still drinking right now, I can't even kind of imagine what my life would be. And also going to pause, not drinking. So I quit drinking when I was 43. I will be 52 this December. So through the whole perimenopause years, I didn't have alcohol, thank goodness, because I really didn't have a hard perimenopause. and I am like, well, I also didn't have any alcohol during that time. So just everything. I think, you know, my own health, my professionally, where I'd be living, what I would be doing, my life would look completely different. And I can't even imagine how it would look. So thank goodness I gave up drinking, and yeah, and just not, you know, like you were saying, kind of navigating and struggling most mornings with that hypoglycemic response after drinking too much. I haven't had to deal with that for almost a decade. So,
Yeah.
and on the back end of that too, I will say, it's, as many people will say, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. Life is life, and there are hard times. And just because we don't drink doesn't mean that we're magically protected from, you know, anything hard. So the challenges have certainly been there. I'm just really glad that alcohol wasn't in the middle of the challenges, you know, while I was in them.
Definitely. Beautiful, beautifully said. I feel, well, not everything on your level because it hasn't been as long, but I definitely feel more powerful in my decision, like the longer time goes on. And it's just so easy. And I feel very proud of myself, you know, like when I share that with someone that I don't drink, because it is kind of an against society kind of decision. And it's not something that I ever thought I could do. And so I just feel very proud of myself and very like strong in I guess my conviction of, you know, not drinking. So it feels like a very powerful decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, there is that too. And I think some of it's just because I work in it and am
Mhm.
talking about it all day, that there really is no charge or no shame around. And I'm like, oh yeah, people, there's still that struggle around. I have no shame out in public of like, I quit drinking. Like, and 8 years ago, I was much more hesitant and protected about it. And I just don't even think twice about that. So yeah, that is a good point too.
Yeah.
Um, but then I'm like, yeah, I kind of don't, you know, I forget that other, you know, it's not that easy sometimes to just say, oh yeah, I don't drink, but I am proud of it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the people you're around too. Like you and I work in health and wellness, and so maybe it's
Yeah.
as weird. But I can see, and I know that's a fear for a lot of people, is if your life and your social circle revolves around drinking and drinking buddies, I can see how that would be a lot more challenging. And I feel like nobody I know has really challenged me. Everyone's been proud of me. I haven't lost any friends. Um, you know, I mean, I joke about it like I stopped drinking. Can you believe it? Me, you know. So, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna ask you one more thing, but I don't know if I'm gonna leave this in, but because I don't know if it's like a good way to wrap up. But I was thinking about asking you, and you kind of brought it up. But okay, when I follow a lot of you know, I follow quite a few like sober accounts and everything. And you just said that too. Like, you can't imagine what your life would be like if you were still drinking. I feel like everybody's like, oh, like your life is on the other side of sobriety. And, you know, I couldn't have done all these things if I was still drinking. And I feel like, and I know life is not all about accomplishments. And I feel like I did more or just as much when I was drinking than I do now. Like, I still got my job while I was still drinking. I was still doing my master's. I did stop drinking like the last year, but I did 2 years of it, you know, while I was drinking. I mean, my wine glass was like my study buddy most of the time. Now, did I retain all the information? No. Would I have retained it otherwise? Also, probably no, because there's so much I don't retain. Life is better in a lot of ways because my mental health is so much better, but I don't feel like it's true what a lot of people say. And I don't know how much it really bothers me or if I just let it bother me that, you know, this notion of like, your life is like so much better when you stop drinking, or you're going to do all these things that you never could have done, or all of a sudden you're appreciating sunsets in nature. I already appreciated all those things more than anybody else before. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I hear you and I agree with you on it. And I think it's a really good thing to clarify. So I don't feel and don't, yeah, of kind of that I quit drinking and now my life just manifested. um, that's not the case for me, and that's not what I'm saying in
Okay.
when I say, things are completely different. And when so I'm not and I know what you're saying with that, of like, because that's out there, of like, I quit drinking and there's almost this sense of like, and now I live in a dream home, and now I'm a millionaire, and now I have this perfect business, and now I have this perfect relationship. Um and it's marketing. It's not true. And that hasn't happened for me at all. None of that has happened. So what I am saying when I say that is, I was, my corporate wellness, when I was in it in 2004 to 2011, that it was in its heyday. And it's really changed. I mean, the people that, we all kind of had to find different avenues around
Mhm.
2013. It's also one of the reasons that my drinking really amped up, because my entrepreneurial life was hanging by a thread. And I didn't quit drinking looking at this as a business, not at all, not even 1% of it. Didn't even cross my mind that this would be a business. And it's like, oh, well, it was kind of the pivot, like I was being divinely held or something, of like, this was the next extension of my work. I mean, this has been my work now for 20 years, the neurotransmitters, the comprehensive wellness. So it's like, okay, well, that was the next right avenue, but nothing about it was conscious or strategic. And so that's what I mean when I say, if I didn't quit drinking, like professionally, I don't know what, because the corporate wellness, it just took a whole different turn. They just, it just was different than it was in the early
Mhm.
2000s. And by happenstance, by luck, that there was like this critical mass that I fell into by talking about not drinking, that I was able to continue my wellness work. I have no idea if I were drinking what kind of wellness work I'd be doing. And like you, I was still pulling it off. Like I could still, it wasn't that I was less effective or any of that. So
Right.
I don't know what my work would be. I also don't know what my health would be.
Mhm.
Because I knew about the breast cancer piece. It's always, it's a concern for me. I watch and monitor. I have fibrocystic breasts, and like I mentioned about going through perimenopause, and I just have this inkling that my health would have been compromised, and who knows what the future holds. And so that's what I mean about, my life just went a whole different direction. Not that I live in the dream house and I have the dream relationship and I make millions of dollars. um, because I think all that's just marketing and social media. And I really mean, just because we don't drink doesn't mean that we don't experience the hard pieces of life. I have absolutely experienced hard pieces, in these 7 years of not drinking. I'm just glad alcohol wasn't in the mix. So does that kind of clarify what?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. I do not come from quit drinking and you're just going to have this magical problem-free life. That's not my message at all.
Jolene, thank you so much for being here today, for answering all my questions. And people can find you on YouTube by searching for your TED Talk, Jolene_Park on Instagram, your website, it's jolenepark.com, right?
Grayareadrinkers.com.
Oh, sorry, grayareadrinkers.com. And your book that will be coming out. So thank
Yeah.
you so very much. I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the conversation around this conversation. The more we can talk about it, the more people can hear it, the better for everybody. So thank you.
Absolutely.